And we're live. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another special webinar session with Normative. My name is Sudison. I'll be hosting our session today. We'll just give a couple of minutes just to let everyone trickle in. Welcome to the July edition of Normative's webinars. Please feel free to use the chat feature to let us know where you're dialing in from. Oh, fantastic. Across the world. Costa Rica, we've got London, we've got Poland, Norfolk. Fantastic. Okay, so I shall start. So, as mentioned, welcome everyone. We'll be covering a very hot topic today, which is SBTi's 2025 version 2 updates. So, welcome to the road to net zero, SBTi's new mandates explained. I have just a couple of housekeeping comments to make before we start. So this webinar session will last maximum 45 minutes. There is a 15-minute Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So please make use of the question feature on the right-hand side of your platform, as you can see. Please be interactive. We will endeavor to answer any of your questions. And if we don't get to your questions in time, then our team will follow up post this webinar. This webinar is being recorded, so anyone who has registered for this webinar already will receive an on-demand version as soon as this webinar is finished. Okay? The agenda for today, myself, Sudison, Head of Demand Gen Marketing here at Normative. I will just run through a couple of slides to introduce who we are. And then my colleague, Rohan, he will tell you about SBTi's version 2 updates and the story so far. And Anne, who will tell you how to partner with Normative and how to achieve success with SBTi. And then at the end of that session, we will have, as mentioned, a 10 to 15-minute slot to cover any questions and answers in our inbox. Rohan, Anne, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Thanks, Sud. Yes, hi, I'm Rohan. I work at Normative as a climate strategy advisor. I've been here for almost 4 years, helping companies in their carbon footprint inventory and also helping them set science-based target. So super happy to be here. And over to you, Anne.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Anne. I'm a senior climate strategy advisor here at Normative. Been here for about 3 years now, in the same team as Rohan and helping lots of different clients set their science-based targets.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Great. I'm excited for this session today. So about Normative, as mentioned, we transform the E in ESG into a strategic advantage for our business, for your businesses and for our clients alike. So who is Normative? Normative is the pioneer in carbon accounting applications. We have been around for about over 12 years. And this is at a time when it is quite the challenge to actually convince and motivate organizations to measure, map, and reduce their carbon emissions. And we did it all on scientific knowledge only. Today, Normative has grown into a market leader with a player with 160 climate professionals at your service. We have a whole dedicated climate strategy team as well to support you on your journey. And that's who Anne and Rohan, the team that they come from as well. Okay. Normative, as mentioned, not only are we the pioneer, but as a market leader, we are recognized by the world's analyst relations. So Gartner, Forrester, Vedantics, and as you can see here, the IDC matrix last year, we are seen as a major player and a market leader within the carbon accounting and management applications space. Okay. We actually serve hundreds of customers, all industries from education, manufacturing, finance to retail. We have a number of household well-known customers around the world, and we're excited to actually to deep dive into a couple of those case studies today as well about how we help them with their SBTi journey. We have a poll today as well that we're running. So we would love to understand where you are and to gauge where you are on your SBTi awareness to understanding. So I'm going to publish a poll now, make it live. And we would love to know from level 1 being the lowest to number 5 being strategic mastery, where you are in your understanding of the poll. So please feel free. We're going to give you a couple of minutes just now just to let us know how much you know about SBTi. Are you already working with them? Have you already submitted your new targets? Yeah, let's take a couple of minutes just to find out where you are. Okay, brilliant. Rohan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sid, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. Great to see the poll results come in, and I really hope and anticipate that this webinar gives you the tools that you need to navigate this kind of challenging waters with a bit more of confidence as such. But before we dive into the major changes bit, I wanted to start things off with a quick introduction to Science-Based Target Initiative and why many companies have set science-based targets and the current status of the draft version. So, in short, SBTi is a global partnership between CDP, United Nations Global Compact, the We Mean Business Coalition, and the World Resource Institute, to name the major partners here. And together, what they've developed is basically what is now considered as the gold standard for setting credible science-based carbon reduction targets. Now, you might hear science-based target name referenced and name dropped quite often, and this is because it provides company with a clear science-backed pathway, and that is in line with the Paris Agreement. So at its core, SBTi literally translates climate science into action. And the targets are built around the IPCC pathway, where the goal is to limit global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And as of 2025, over 7,000 companies have put their trust in this and have validated targets through SBTi. And all of them they're basically listed publicly on the SBTi dashboard. So in short, I would summarize SBTi as it gives companies an answer to a very important question, which is how much and how fast do we need to reduce emissions to safeguard our planet? So then what is the value of getting SBTi approved targets? And there are some compelling arguments that support it. Firstly, it signals to investors that the business is actually aligned with the latest climate science, and this is increasingly seen as a sign of long-term resilience in planning. Second, it also helps attract customers. Both individuals and organizations are more likely to buy from business that take climate responsibility, and I am one of them. I do take sustainability seriously, and I try to buy from companies that take climate responsibility as their core business activity. But also, when you sell to B2B, it matters even more because, as you know, your emissions eventually become part of your customer scope 3 emissions as well. So basically, your reductions help them meet their own climate goals. And finally, there is always this regulatory landscape which is constantly shifting. You had frameworks like CSRD that kind of wish to raise the bar there, and there is always going to be a constant pressure from governments, stakeholders, and markets alike. So, in short, setting science-based target now puts companies kind of ahead of the curve, and it clearly sets a clear message that they're ready for the future. So moving on to the next one, so basically these targets have been set on the version 1.2 of SBTi Corporate Net Zero Standard, but Even though that had provided a very good foundation, there is always room for improvement. And earlier this year in March, SBTi released version 2 of the standard, which has been considered a significant update. And this is basically collecting feedback from companies and stakeholders alike. They have revised the whole version, and it directly addresses some of the concerns and challenges that were seen in the earlier versions. The focus of version 2 is clearly on making the standard a bit more actionable and feasible, especially for companies that are at different stages in their climate journey. We have a dedicated section for it, but some of the key tones of advancements include a clear intermediately milestones to help companies stay on track of their net zero journey, and a stronger guidance around reporting and tackling progress. So we at Normative, we see this as a crucial step that not only pushes the climate agenda, but also makes it more practical for companies to take meaningful and sustainable climate action. But in terms of what's the current status of version 2, well, following the release of the initial draft, there was a brief consultation period until the 1st of June, and Normative has participated and contributed to this phase, and our feedback was from a practitioner's perspective. And currently, the SBTi is moving into something called phase 2, which will involve a second round of consultation and pilot testing. But there is also a testing process designed to collect feedback from various companies and industries. And firstly, there is going to be a company survey that is open from the 16th of June till the 15th of August. And this is open to all companies, so anybody can participate and give feedback to the standard. And but my hope is that with this webinar, you can really take part and help shape the standard's future. And then in Q3 2025, some of these companies will be invited to phase 2, which is going to be a company submission. Rather, these companies will actually apply the standard to their own operations and report on their experience. So basically giving SBTi a bit more of a real world data to work with and get feedback on the standard, that is. So moving into the next section. Just, and in this section, we are diving into the updates from V2 standard and what these actually mean for businesses that are working towards their net zero goals. And I have some slides on the general overview. So we'll be beginning with a high level overview of the key updates and then provide context on what has changed here. And from there, I have some slides where we will take a closer look at the specific revision to the validation model and the target setting process in the slides to follow. So one of the most significant shifts with net zero commitment is their replacement of their previous 24-month pledge framework with a more rigorous and structured process now. And the draft also recognizes the need for having a company segregation or a company categorization. And it introduces two new categories for companies. So you have category A, which encompasses large companies globally and also medium-sized companies in high and upper middle income countries. And then you have category B, which basically takes care of the rest. So medium companies in lower middle and lower income companies and all small and micro companies. So the basic shift here is unlike the earlier approach, which offered either a full route or an SME route, and this is outside the sector-specific pathways, that is. The new structure aims to drive broader and more inclusive climate action. This also means that companies must now publicly commit to net zero and set science-based target within a 12-month period for category A and a 24-month period for category B. And another big change is companies are also required to publish the climate transition plan within a 12-month time frame from the target validation by SBTi. The standard also has a new outlook on evaluating performance in the base year and has proposed several important changes. And this is basically just a proposal. I don't know if it's going to be completely true if you ask me next year, but yeah, the first thing about evaluating base year performance is on the consolidation approach. So they've revised this, and now the revision has brought about changes which aligns more closely with leading practices and other voluntary reporting frameworks. So there is a uniformity there. Secondly, the guidance on base year selection has been refined. And the aim here is that now the chosen base year is accurate representation of the company structure at that point of time and the emission profile during the base year. Now, this is quite fundamental just to make sure that the targets are both realistic and effective with having accurate representation of the company structure. Then a more structured approach is also introduced for Scope 3 emission sources. And they identify that Scope 3 continues to be one of the biggest challenges for companies. Therefore, they want to provide a bit more of stronger foundation in setting Scope 3 targets. And finally, this one is the biggest kind of change here, which is standard introduces stronger expectations around data quality. Now, category A companies will be required to obtain a third-party assurance of their greenhouse gas inventories. So in terms of target setting, as we have a dedicated section for target setting with a deep dive on scope 1, 2, 3 targets changes, this is more of an overview with the intention that just to give the intention behind the proposed changes. With target setting, there is a more nuanced benchmarking approach that the standard has taken, where it aims to create a bit more tailored and realistic targets. And there is a clear guidance on how scopes and timeline of targets work. They have addressed residual emissions and they have detailed on how to handle them. There is also a bit of focus on target transparency, review, and adjustment. There is a strong focus on the need of clear reporting, which was one of the feedback that they got in from the initial version. And they have added regular evaluation and flexibility to adapt targets as needed. The draft has also differentiated ongoing emissions and residual emissions, and it has opened or it has offered an optional additional recognition for companies that address ongoing emissions through the beyond value chain mitigation. This is more of an intensive incentivizing beyond value chain mitigation. And V2 has also provided guidelines for companies on making claims. So basically claims for science-based target, and it has clarified what can be claimed at different stages of target setting. So along with the V2 draft, there was an introduction to a new model for validation. And just to refer to version 1.2, which is the previous version, the 1.2 concentrated on assessing target ambition upfront, and version 2 marks a significant evolution in this sense. So now it has introduced a more comprehensive validation model that covers the full target cycle by assessing both the ambition upfront, but also the progress made over time. Now, this shift is basically a representation of how SBTi really wants to support companies, but also wants to hold companies accountable for their targets. And basically, they have expanded their focus from target setting to also include target implementation. And in this, companies are now expected to not only set targets that are credible, but also they should be able to demonstrate progress over time and recalibrate whenever needed. And the framework actually reinforces accountability and basically making sure that the drive is continuous and improvements are along the net zero journey that the company wants to take. The model kind of includes three major checkpoints. First is the entry check. This is basically going to be an initial assessment by SBTi, just to confirm that there is leadership support and readiness to actually engage with SBTi. And then you have the initial validation, which is pretty much similar to the previous version, but here you have to validate the base year performance and also set targets based on that. And this is where category A companies have to be setting targets within a 12-month period, and category B companies have a 12-month time frame. However, you can do both of them together. Basically, the entry check and initial validation can be done at the same time. The biggest change here is, of course, on the renewal of validation. So basically, in the renewal validation, it is going to be a recurring assessment of target, assessing targets and assessing progress against targets. And there is going to be new target set for areas that are lacking and that need further transformation, just so that your company is in line with the net zero goals that you have set. But again, like previous versions, this can be triggered by multiple things. It includes significant changes to your company structure, or if you want to do recalculation, this is also going to be the pathway that you have to follow. And another big change is throughout these process, companies must be able to provide necessary information needed for assessment. And there is a possibility of spot checks that can occur at any time, but this is just for SBTi to ensure that there is ongoing conformity. And SBTi is also looking into developing criteria assessment indicators just to evaluate the adherence to the standard as such. In terms of major changes in target setting, so version 1.2 was a bit more flexible. It allowed combining scope 1, scope 2 target and also had flexible scope 2 targets. But the revised draft now mandates separate scope 1 and scope 2 targets. And as one of the major updates, their focus is to ensure that the company's direct emissions, which fall under scope 1, the reductions for direct emissions truly align with the company's net zero goals as well. And the previous edition also allowed companies to choose between either location-based or a market-based approach. But V2 now mandates that companies must set a location-based scope 2 target plus a market-based or a zero carbon electricity target. And here, basically, from the previous version where you had a renewable energy target, this is replaced with the zero carbon electricity target, just to be a bit more technology agnostic in that sense. For scope 3, it addresses challenges by making the targets a bit more effective in terms of supplier engagement. But some of the key revisions include a mandatory scope 3 near-term target. And this is now required for category A companies, while it is still optional for category B. However, for long-term targets, this is still under consultation. So maybe in the second phase of consultation, there will be a bit more clarity around that. There is also a big change in terms of the revised scope 3 boundaries, which basically moves from the earlier percentage-based method to a more focused approach. Here, the fixed minimum boundary earlier was 67% for for near term and 90% for long term. But now the priority is going to be on emission intensive activities, which they have defined as if an activity represents at least 5% of your scope 3 emissions, it needs to be in the boundary no matter if it's 67 or not. And they have put a lot of emphasis on supplier engagement and areas of greatest influence. This basically means that you have to have targets with your tier 1 suppliers. They've also emphasized on new target setting methods that is more realistic. So they have highlighted alignment metrics a lot, which is basically something like having a procurement target from net zero aligned suppliers or having revenue as a KPI that is coming from net zero activities. This is just to make sure that there is flexibility in measurements of data because, of course, Scope 3 has been a big data challenge problem for all companies. For residual emissions, they have three approaches that they have proposed. And this is basically to address the impact of the residual emissions. And they haven't stopped. So in the sense that previously it was only during the transition to net zero, but now they also have some feedback on what will happen from the net zero year and onwards. And on the topic of addressing ongoing emissions, like I mentioned before, they have incentivized this by recognizing companies that have addressed the impact of ongoing emissions, but this is still optional. And it's basically helping or pushing companies to support mitigation outside its value chain. So what does it actually mean for companies? Well, there is a clear transition timeline ahead. and companies can still set near-term targets under version 1.2 during 2025 and 2026. And these targets will still remain valid for 5 years, or at least until the end of 2030, whichever that comes first is going to be taken. But starting 2027, all near-term and long-term targets must follow version 2. And for the companies that have already approved and set targets, there is no immediate change here. These targets will remain valid until the scheduled end date, or at least until 2030. And SBTi is aiming to share details on the renewal process for these companies later this year. This, since a lot of companies have their scheduled date in the coming years, this was one of the reasons why it pushed SBTi to even release the V2 draft. But while these specific details are still pending on pending finalization, and the draft is still out for consultation, the the general feel is that the version is anticipated to elevate standards basically in scope 3 supplier engagement, target transparency, and alignment with 1.5-degree pathways. That's the general trend that we see. But what does it actually mean for strategy and planning then? It means that for companies that are setting target now, it is crucial to plan ahead. So even if you're using version 1.2 for the short term, you should be looking at version 2 ideally, and you should be building timelines to anticipate the changes. This might even include preparing the transition to have scope 3 targets and to meet new supplier engagement requirements. But this is just to ensure that your internal teams have the capacity and have the resources to handle the level of detail that SBTi is expecting. But SBTi has committed to offering a transition pathway so as to help companies avoid redundant work. But that doesn't mean that your efforts today is going to go for waste. I think it will still feed into further updates. But we are still waiting for more updates, and it is likely that we'll get more during the second public consultation. So practically, companies should be budgeting time and resources now just to revisit and revise targets before 2030 or whichever that comes first. Again, just to sum it up, version 2 isn't finalized, but it's clear that the action should be now. Companies need to start preparing now to stay ahead. And we feel that these changes are meaningful, but any strategic early action will make a difference. That brings us to the final question, or next question in that sense. How can you partner with Normative? And for that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Anne, who will walk you through how Normative can support at each step of the journey. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you so much, Rohan. Great. Yeah. So as Rohan said, how can you partner with Normative to achieve success with science-based targets? So first of all, you want to make sure that you have a full inventory for a really robust baseline. So we can help you measure your company's carbon footprints across your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions to ensure that you have a complete inventory before you submit to science-based targets. We can then give you insights into your data and really help you start honing in on your emissions hotspots and where you need to focus on, especially with the new version 2 guidance. We can isolate exactly which parts of your inventory that you need to assess. And in the example that you can see on screen of the Insights dashboard, we would start focusing on these highest emitting categories. You can then work with a climate strategy advisor, so someone in mine and Rohan's team, to start thinking about what targets you can actually set to align with science-based targets to have the highest impact on your emissions. Then, moving on to value chain engagement. As Rohan said, there is a real focus now with engaging with your tier 1 suppliers. So you can actually engage with suppliers directly using our value chain engagement tool, or VCE. This lets you collect supplier-specific carbon data and sustainability targets, no matter the size or maturity level. Suppliers can submit their own data through a simple survey, and then we can actually connect it directly to your Scope 3 calculations, which not only improves the accuracy of your Scope 3, but it also helps you identify where the reduction opportunities exist. You'll also be able to see which suppliers have science-based targets to track that progress over time. This leads me on to our reduction module, which is part of the platform, where you can actually see with a scenario analysis tool what impact your supplier's targets will have on your own emissions data from now until 2050. Then you'll be able to visualize your targets in the targets area of the dashboard. So you can see what targets you've set with science-based targets, but also most critically, you can see the changes in the progress that you are making year on year. But outside of the platform, we also have consultancy support. So we have an end-to-end science-based target solution where we essentially guide you through every single stage of the process, from setting the targets, completing the submission form, but also quite critically aligning with internal stakeholders and decision makers. And we also help with the validation process because science-based targets will come back with a lot of questions about the inventory and the targets that you've set. We have a 100% success rate on science-based target submissions, including with the new science-based targets portal, which was only launched last month. We are helping clients who are currently setting targets to try and go beyond the minimum ambition, just to ensure that the targets they're setting now with version 1.2 are actually future-proofed and aligned with the version 2 draft guidance. And you can see the results that we've got. Our work with science-based targets has earned an average satisfaction score of 4.66 out of 5. Here is an example of one of the companies that we've helped achieve a science-based target. So Nordic Leisure Travel Group came to us and they needed to get a full emissions baseline, but also a science-based targets. So within just over 12 months, we actually managed to achieve that. So we started with the robust baseline by mapping the emissions across really complex verticals, including airlines, hotels, retail. And then we got the targets all sorted and sent over to science-based targets, and then they were validated. We've also helped them achieve their sustainability goals, including 100% renewable electricity for owned hotels and fleet modernization with Airbus. We got some really nice feedback from the client that said that partnering with Normative has really transformed our climate journey. And constant feedback that we do get is that the help of the climate strategist is really key as well to ensure that you have a really smooth process with science-based targets. Other ways that we can support is really focusing on that sort of tier one supplier. So in addition to just the value chain engagement module, we offer more consultancy services to get more supplier data into your inventory with a service which is called supplier data enrichment. So essentially, we will conduct the research for you, gather the GHG inventory data from selected suppliers, and then put that into the VCE module for you. And the key outcome of that is essentially you're not only going to increase the accuracy, but you're also going to have much more oversight of what targets your suppliers are setting and saving your team quite a lot of time by doing that. We also have what's called the carbon network. So this is an area within the VCE where we're kind of gathering all of the data from suppliers. So this might be coming from that service, supplier data enrichment. It might be coming from other supplier surveys, and it might be coming from Normative itself, inputting data from top companies into the carbon network. This means that you're more likely to be able to find the supplier data on the network, again, saving you time and trying to streamline this process. And then we also have something that's really important, especially with the new version 2 guidance, is audit-ready greenhouse gas baselines. So in line with version 2, companies must obtain at least a limited assurance for their greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So within the platform, we have full transparency. So we have every single emission factor, inflation adjustment, conversion factor that we've used. And this is available in the platform. And we've had really great feedback from auditors that it's really easy to see exactly what we've done. And oftentimes they don't even need to speak to us because it's been so transparent. Our work has achieved a 100% success rate in third-party audits, which again is really going to help future-proof your submission in case SBTi mandates this audited base year after the draft has been done. We also offer Audit Plus, which is an optional service, which is essentially a hands-on support from start to finish of an audit, where we have several sessions with the auditor to make sure that this is really smooth and successful. This is helpful, especially for the first audit that you ever do. You might have a lot more questions, a lot more in depth, but we've had really fantastic feedback from that service as well, that the auditors, it's made their lives a lot easier as well. But now I will hand back over to Sid, who will be leading the Q&A.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Rohan. I hope everyone in the audience has been enjoying and found the slides insightful and valuable so far. Please feed in your questions. We've actually got quite a lot of questions in our inbox, which is great. And Rohan, equally take a look through the questions, which ones, if you want to specifically focus on first. But Rohan, I've got one question perhaps for you. You mentioned that Normative participated in the consultation phase of the version 2 draft. Could you share which specific areas or topics that you focused your feedback on? And if possible, touch upon why those particular areas were important to address.
Uh, Certainly. I'll have to really jog my memory here because this was a combined effort from the team, but I'll try to summarize most of it. I know that we focused our feedback basically in few key areas, basically on target setting and progress tracking. I personally worked with scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 target feedback, so I'm going to be a bit more specific on that. So basically, with Scope 1, they have revamped a budget contraction method. We really like the fact that this is there, but also it's quite complex and it's data intensive, which can be a bit of a barrier for companies that are just starting out now on the journey. So our feedback on this was basically giving them a more tiered approach. So start off with the existing linear contraction method, and then probably evolving into a bit more robust methodology if the company wants to pursue that one. For scope 2, it was a no-brainer. We completely support the change to both location and market-based targets, as we think it's a more positive step, and it also brings accountability in the more comprehensive sense. But there was a mention of allowing flexible methodologies, but especially for the regions that has a lot of carbon intensive grids. And this is where we had a feedback on having a real tight safeguarding, probably having safeguards around energy sourcing just to avoid double counting and greenwashing in that sense. For scope 3, our feedback was on the proposed supplier engagement target. We do agree that there is an importance in aligning value chain, but one of the things that was a bit difficult was requiring 100% tier 1 supplier engagement target by 2030 for emission intensive activities. Uh, we felt like this was the only bit that kind of moved away from the whole concept of V2, which was having more attainable targets, and we feel that this was not well thought through or well put through. So basically, our feedback here is to keep it as an option, but have more definition on what is that they claim as emission intensive activity. And there was also a bit on transparency and progress tracking, which is basically around the validation model as well. And we are super open to the proposed 5-year target cycle. The only concern here is if it's made mandatory, it might seem cumbersome for a lot of companies. So we do have a feedback around having a less formal or an optional formal review with a lighter touch alternative for companies who really don't want to do that as such. So basically, our feedback is straightforward. We have aimed to ensure that the standard keeps it ambitious, but also takes into consideration that companies from wherever they are today will be able to drive meaningful reduction and make progress. I hope that answers the question.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rohan. There's a popular question here actually, which is, does the AB company categorization takes into account turnover and number of employees, or is it just based on location and geography?
Uh, no, definitely. I think it takes into consideration the emissions. If it's less than 100,000 tons or 10,000 tons, it's still considered small, but there is no clear definition for large or medium companies. And it does take into consideration the balance sheet, the turnover, and the employee number. But this is only valid for large and medium companies. So all large companies will have to sit in category A. The only categorization difference would be for medium-sized companies, whether it would be in category A or category B, and this is where the balance sheet and the net turnover comes into play.
Okay, brilliant. Anne, are there any questions in there that you want to tackle? There's a few couple of popular ones here. Um, there's one here by Mattia. How can big companies set targets that are compatible with SBTi requirements? In my opinion, SBTi is not really compatible to the needs of a fast growing company. So we see the removal of Microsoft, Unilever, Walmart, because they could not provide compatible, achievable targets. Do you guys have any comments on that?
I think this is a common question that comes up quite a lot with our clients. We expect that we're going to expand. Why do we have to set these targets? And I think it's a really important thing to just take a step back and think of the bigger picture. We are obviously all here for the same purpose, which is to kind of reduce the impact on the climate. And we're really trying to do that. So I think with this new version 2 guidance, it's really helpful the fact that they've introduced this transition plan, because I think this is a key thing that kept happening. People kept setting targets, but then because potentially a board member had asked them to do it, but they hadn't actually thought about how they were going to achieve it. So I think science-based targets has taken that feedback on, and they're really, really trying to push you to have that transition plan. And I think they are going to dig into it a little bit more rather than just blindly kind of accepting the targets. So I think this is a really excellent input that they've like started to do, because they've had such interesting feedback before. And I think we just need to take a step back and think, okay, this is probably the gold standard in target setting. We should do this for the planet and for to make sure that we can get the net zero goals sort of by 2050.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. Um, we've got 3 more minutes before we shut shop. So please, like I mentioned, please have like submit your questions. As I mentioned, even if we don't get to your questions today, we will have the team follow up individually after this session. So please keep asking your questions. How about this one? So based on this framework, are there any specific steps that the SBTi recommends companies must follow when setting Scope 3 targets, and which ones are most critical for ensuring alignment with the standard? Who wants to take that?
I am muted. I'm sorry. I wanted to take this, but yeah, I was muted. Yeah, definitely. SBTi does lay out a structured stepwise process for setting scope 3 target. It was a very difficult graph to decipher, but basically the journey will start with the commitment letter that you send, but this is going to be the public commitment that that your company will have or will reach net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. And then comes then you must do an inventory analysis. So you need to complete your scope 3 GHG inventory. And this is going to be the crucial step because this lays foundation on how you are going to engage with your tier one suppliers, think about your emission intensive activities and how you can evaluate the base year performance against these. They have a few metrics, like I mentioned before. There is obviously the absolute emissions. There is also the average intensity method that they have proposed in the previous version. But here they've also have supplier alignment with net zero as one of the metrics that you need to have in the base year. And upon that, you do your benchmarking. And for category A companies, they need to get their scope 3 or their greenhouse gas inventory audited. And after this, only you'll be able to set the near-term targets that is in line with abatement of scope 3 emissions. And as mentioned earlier, these targets must cover all the relevant scope 3 sources, and it cannot just be the 67% as before. And if I can just summarize in three major categories. First is the net zero commitment. Second is the base year performance assessment, where you understand your GA3, GHG, Scope 3 inventory, identify sources and determine performance. And then finally, you have the target setting. So where you benchmark and set near-term targets.
Brilliant. Super. Thank you, Rohan.
Of course.
All righty. So, um, Rohan, and thank you for your highly insightful slides and your presentation today. I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed and are taking away several learning lessons. As mentioned, your questions don't go in vain in the chat box, so feel free to ask one couple more questions. We will keep a record of all these questions, and we will have the team um, individually come back to you as well after this session. So thank you, everyone. Um, if you're in a position to speak to us already, to talk to us about your first step to net zero, please feel free to book a demo. Our website is normative.io/demo. Please log in. We can book a session for 20 to 30 minutes. It's very at your pace, and we could love to have a walkthrough through our platform as well and answer any further questions in that session. And with that, thank you, everyone. As mentioned, you'll receive the recording on demand version of this webinar in the next couple of days. Rohan, Anne, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for attending this session. Thank you.
Thank you.